Hey there everyone, this is American Ben from Generation Films, and today I'm going to be breaking down why South Korean filmmakers do monsters and zombies so well. And here to help me out is Congo from my other channel, Generation Ochi, which covers East Asian films. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Why is a guy whose first name is American covering South Korean drama? The truth is, I'm actually South Korean. Alright, I lied. I can't back that up. And South Koreans could no doubt tell their own story best. I know that. But given the opportunity to say something about the arts of South Korea, I'm not going to turn it down. As the more fervent followers of my YouTube channel will tell you, I have a passion for South Korean movies and as of recent, shows as well. K-dramas are the shit.
Taki mushrooms are delicious in soup.
Seriously though, I'm currently watching Itaewon Class and it's tugging at my heartstrings. I should have known better after Love Alarm. Damn, that show left me hurting. Hashtag Team Sun-O. Anyway, I watched my first South Korean film when I was just a baby. Okay, that was another lie. I'm just trying to establish some credibility here. No, my first experience with South Korean film probably happened sometime, around 2005 or so, and I've never looked back. I remember thinking to myself back then, how are these films not omnipresent on the world stage? Why don't Americans watch these movies? I mean, damn it, Song Kang-ho is one of the greatest living actors. But not a single person I knew back then had any idea who he was. And so yeah, 2019's Parasite is a widely celebrated and beloved film. But South Koreans have been making brilliant films like this for decades. And when I visited South Korea at the end of 2019, I was pleased to discover that this brilliance isn't contained to the realm of cinema. Rather, it extends to all aspects of South Korean society. South Korea is a country that has blossomed into one of the most magnificent and impressive places in the entire world. I love South Korea. As a matter of fact, pretend that Congo here is South Korea. But I digress. Given everything I just explained, when Discover Korea Live, a virtual Korean cultural festival that runs from June 1st to June 2nd, link down below, reached out to me and asked if I'd like to make a video about South Korean cinema for the festivities, I was quick to say, yeah, you've got your man. Now, a lot of my favorite South Korean content is awfully old by now. One of the best movies I've ever seen is a sweet little ditty called Thirst, a 2009 vampire film starring Song Kang-ho and Kim Ok-bin. Both of them are fantastic in the movie and develop an odd but substantial chemistry during the course of its narrative, one that thrives both on pleasure and pain. It was Thirst which made me realize how particularly adept South Koreans are at making films about monsters, and looking back, it's really no surprise that they do ferocious fiends of all sorts so well. In general, their movies are exceptionally thoughtful, deep, and imbued with themes that speak to the very real and difficult truths inherent to humans and the society they have built. And so what I would like to do now is weave my way through a list of recent South Korean shows and movies involving monsters, that is, monsters of many forms, not just the big blue grotesque kind, and break down why it is that I find them to be particularly thematically substantive, and explain how together they are indicative of a very special artistic culture intrinsic to a very special country. The first show I'd like to discuss is Sweet Home. Based on the webtoon of the same name, Sweet Home tells the story of the residents of the Green Home apartment complex, who are suddenly thrust into a post-apocalyptic world overrun by killer monsters who they avoid by remaining confined to their building, as well as to their own minds, as they struggle to survive demons within and without. Of course, some of the residents themselves turn into monsters as their desires consume them and eventually have transformative effects on their physical appearances. The characters in the show question at times whether just letting go and becoming a monster would be easier. At one point, the show openly questions what would happen in the event of an apocalypse. Would humans evolve into something else in order to survive or maintain their humanity? This is the crux of the show's message right here. When tested with dire situations, when filled with fear and threatened with death, can humans restrain the monster within? And the characters, the humans in the show rather, slowly learn to preserve what makes them human despite what despair may come upon their mind to pass. Sweet Home starts out as just a fun horror series. The monsters are cool and colorful, and it's a thrill to sit back and watch them chase down Green Home's inhabitants. But about halfway through the series, the so-called monsters appear less and less frequently, and the emphasis of the narrative turns to the characters and dialogue. But the monsters don't actually disappear, because in Sweet Home, all of them are humans. Throughout the series, they all start out as humans, and it's supposedly their hidden desires which turn them into monsters. These people stuck in the Green Home apartments often hurt each other without any need to manifest a physically monstrous form. Sweet Home investigates what it means to be human, and then too, what it means to become a monster. And even digs into whether or not letting the monster within out can at times be necessary, albeit injurious to human essence. I think it's really intriguing that the show explores humanity in this way. We all have demons within us that we contend with and attempt to overcome in order to present ourselves to the world as functional, empathetic people. Certainly South Koreans are some of the most humane people I've ever met. In this way, they're like New Yorkers. Okay, a bit nicer. My brief experience of South Korea, gleaned from a short excursion in the country between a motorcycle melody across Vietnam and Laos, is that the people there are extremely hospitable. Foreigners are part of everyday life, and they readily engage Westerners. South Koreans were so kind to me and were eager to teach me about their culture. Well, except for one small woman who stole my bike. But that's a story for another video. I suppose I'm generalizing a bit here, alas, what more can a tourist do, but South Koreans seem to be very thoughtful en masse. And this thoughtfulness, I suspect, leads to the philosophizing that's ever present in their art. Though, let me be clear, when I was there, I saw no giant blue monsters, so don't have reservations in that regard. Okay, I saw less than 3 giant blue monsters. South Korea is a successful country, and its people know it. And they're proud of it, as they should be. But it wasn't always a land of prosperity and peace, no. Such good things are born out of a long history of hard work, sacrifice, and struggle. Strength is born from struggle, and this is what we see in the period horror series Kingdom. Kingdom is set 3 years after the Imjin War, a series of Japanese invasions of the Korean peninsula that took place between 1592 and 1598 and left millions dead in its wake, and tells the story of the Crown Prince of Joseon's struggle to save his people amidst the breakout of a deadly plague that's quickly consuming the kingdom and turning everyone into zombies.
Other than that though, things are swell.
Kingdom isn't some basic zombie tale. No, it's more about what lies beneath the surface than about what overruns it. I talk, of course, of hunger. The cost of war isn't only borne by those laid dead by its battles, but so too by the people who live beyond the confines of bloodshed. During the time in which Kingdom takes place, Korea is forming its identity while simultaneously healing from wars past and preparing for conflict looming in the days ahead. And all the while, its millions of people are left to wonder what tomorrow holds, life or death, progress or peril. They're in want of basic necessities and rather short on answers. Hunger colludes in Kingdom to define the day, just as I suppose it has for so many billions of people across time. However, hungering for power turns people to monsters the same way that hungering for food does. Insecurity and desperation reduce power seekers like Lord Cho and the Queen Regent to their primal instincts. It's this type of lust which compels war hero and classy beardnik Lord An-hyun to implore Koreans to uphold the core values of their nation and be selfless, to not think about their own hunger, but the hunger of all.
이 나라의 국본인 세자를 탄압하여 종묘사직을 뿌리째 뒤흔든 죄 죽어 마땅하다.
And only in this way, by rejecting selfishness and greed and working together, can Korea rise. And along the way, the Crown Prince takes this to heart as he slowly comes to realize that in order to save the nation, he must save all of it, so as to completely destroy the infection. If one region grows hungry, then eventually the hunger hatched there will cover o'er the land. The subtext of Kingdom is made all the more meaningful because indeed the Korea we see today has successfully emerged into a rich and powerful country that can feed its people. And South Koreans met such success, no doubt, by fostering a system of strong values. I remember when I was riding the train to Busan, I noticed how beautiful the country is from northwest to southeast and back. At least from afar, every city seemed well kept. Its roads were with nary a scratch, let alone the type of craterish potholes which plague every road in New York. And as I let the train take me away through a Korean country dream whilst the miles of idyllic surroundings unto a seeming eternity bound my mind in daylight revelry, I thought to myself, this is a really organized country. But even more so, it's beautiful. I must say, Korea's urban sprawl is nothing short of scintillating, but still perhaps second to its natural beauty, an aspect of the country which is evident in Kingdom, and which not even the monsters risen from the pangs of hunger can tarnish. The time in which Kingdom's story takes place is dark. The nation then is awash in strife, and so the monsters in men are easily identified. But today's South Korea is set amidst great prosperity, and so it's harder to tell what people are made of or how they would react given catastrophe. And this brings us to the world-famous film Train to Busan. On the surface, it's just a damn good zombie flick, but a closer look at its narrative reveals a worthy subtext which explores what becomes of people in the modern developed world when the bonds of society break. The outbreak in the film starts with a chemical leak at a biotech plant, and then from there spreads across South Korea, turning the country into a dystopian wasteland. At the center of the story, we follow the trials and tribulations of Suk-woo, a workaholic fund manager and a neglectful father. Feeling guilty for his poor parenting, as a birthday present, he decides to take his daughter Soo-an on a train trip to Busan to see her mother. Unfortunately, the zombie outbreak comes to light during the course of their journey, and thanks to an infected passenger, the disease finds its way onto the train. Thus, Suk-woo and his daughter must attempt to survive the hungry horde feasting on the passengers within the rail cars and hold out long enough to make it to Busan safely. The film does good work in forcing the audience to question the ethics of selfish versus selfless action. Sometimes selfish action is rather appalling, as we see with the me-first behavior of railway CEO Yeon-suk, who is willing to let other passengers die in order to save his own hide. However, when it comes to Suk-woo's so-called selfish action in protecting his daughter, sometimes at the expense of other people, right and wrong becomes less clear.
신경 쓰지 마. 그냥 각자 알아서 하는 거야.
아빠는 자기밖에 몰라.
The film seems to suggest that perhaps to some degree, neighborly piety and selfish action aren't conducive to survival. But it doesn't necessarily advise against such behavior either. Rather, it seeks to convince us that no matter what, some people are going to die, and that some level of sacrifice is needed if anyone at all is going to survive. Ultimately, outcomes are not necessarily the point of the story. What is more important to focus on is what becomes of the characters when they're thrust to face dire circumstance. As in Kingdom, the outbreak brings out monsters in some people even before they're ever bitten.
눈 감아! 눈 감아! 너 좀 있으면 저 괴물 새끼는 처음 변하는 거야! 보고 싶어? 이 새끼들 다 쫓아내야 돼!
Others, however, prove themselves to be surprisingly compassionate in terrible times. Tough guy Sang-hwa, for instance, reveals himself to be a brave and empathetic man. As for Suk-woo, in the fray, this man who has not always been the best dad, as he, does evil things like buy his daughter video game systems she already has, proves himself to be a loving father and a courageous person. And it's not so clear that without the harrowing events which occur on the train, that Suk-woo would have ever learned to appreciate his daughter, or that his daughter would ever have come to realize how heroic her father is and how much she loves him.
아깐 정말 무서웠어요. 아빠를 다시는 못 보게 될 것 같아서.
It's on this train that our workaholic main character spends time with his daughter. It's within the rail cars that he makes a true friend in Sang-hwa. Obstacles, pain, and despair give life to some of the sweetest things known to man, because connection is born through shared struggle. In a weird way, Suk-woo finds everything good he ever had on that train, save for maybe Korean barbecue. This, of course, all makes us wonder whether perhaps it's harder in a sprawling, fast-paced, business-oriented metropolis like, say, Seoul, to make connections with others. Well, I think perhaps the film is being a bit harsh here. Seoul is one of the warmest places I've ever been to in terms of the amenability of the people there. And by the way, I rode the train to Busan while watching Train to Busan. Yeah, awesome experience. And sorry to say, the passengers on the train were quite courteous and the ride was pleasant. Though I did get bitten a few times, but to be completely fair, I did bite first. The point is, South Korea is a lighthearted place, and I honestly think it's best represented in some of its more lighthearted series, such as the Uncanny Counter. The Uncanny Counter story follows a bunch of demon hunters, called Counters, living in the fictional South Korean city of Jungjin, who, unbeknownst to the lay population around them, spend their days and nights eating noodles. Oh, and also fighting powerful evil spirits who've gained access to the material realm via possession of compatible human hosts. The Counters boast an array of special abilities themselves, from combat prowess to telepathy, gifts which they're endowed with thanks to their spirit partners who reside within them and who coalesce in a boundary between the real world and the afterlife known as Young. I did myself gain some counter powers while on the beach in Busan, so this may be based on a true story. But I digress. When one of the Counters is killed, his young partner leaves his body and, unable to find a habitable comatose host, which is the usual method of possession for Counters, instead settles into a conscious body owned by our main character So-mun, who, while very much not in a coma, has a special connection with death and evil spirits, given a tragedy that befell him and his family when he was a boy, during which both his parents perished in a car crash. Now, evil spirits aren't a new idea. Myths of malicious spectral beings pervade human history. But why? Well, probably in large part because we want to try and rationalize why the people do the things they do, why people do evil things. And the Uncanny Counter brings this dynamic to life by making evil spirits responsible for many of the bad things happening in its world. Sometimes it's people we care about who lose themselves to a sort of demonic state and thus act out in various wicked ways. And see, if this happens simply as a result of their genetics or rearing, as in by the randomness of nature, if it's just who they are, we feel a loss of power to correct and help such people. But if an evil spirit is responsible for the loved one's misdeeds, well, then perhaps we can save them by expelling the devil within. The Counters are angelic figures who must work to protect humanity and restore goodness in the world by exorcising evil spirits from it. They are expected to be enlightened, selfless, and restrained. And yet Counters slip up all the time. They are subject to their emotions. They submit to madness for the sake of love, and act out in rage at different points throughout the show. They do things that evil spirits would do at times, not Counters, but ultimately they're forgiven for their mistakes. And all of this makes us wonder if the difference between becoming a Counter and an evil spirit can really just be boiled down to one's willingness to change and improve before coming face to face with the pearly gates of heaven or the mud-bathing cannibals of Hellspa. The show's ultimate message is that physical life has an inherent temporal nature to it. It has a beginning and an end, and in that relatively short time, one may not get everything right. But it's important to at least try to be virtuous.
그래, 세상에 악기들만 있는 건 아니지. 이렇게 웃고 떠들고 부대끼면서 사는 거. 그게 사는 거지.
And while for some reason, known only by powers beyond even young, the world must be protected from evil spirits, there's an extent to which this epic battle itself provides for some of the most beautiful things in life, such as friendship and noodles. Noodles. And certainly the friendships which blossom in the show remind me of the conviviality and fraternity endemic to city life in South Korea. Yet of course, humane people are going to be perturbed by unfortunate happenings, and it's a rather romantic thought, or a humane hope really, that bad can be expunged from the world by casting out the soul-stowed monsters within it. But of course, as I alluded to earlier in the video, not all monsters are so supernatural. The series Extracurricular tells the story of a young, soft-spoken man named Jisoo who, in need of money to go to college, starts a compensated dating business, aka a sex work outfit, all the while trying to navigate the ins and outs and general struggles of high school. And somewhere along the way he partners up with Yuri, a classmate of his whose parents exact on her a rigid lifestyle filled with a disciplined and perhaps even draconian diet and a reading list overrun with books by top CEOs. Jaded and angsty, Yuri responds to her parents' soulless designs for her future by imagining herself brutally murdering them. And when that gets old, she helps Jisoo take his business to the next level. Extracurricular is set against Seoul's urban sprawl. We see a lively city rife with color and character. And indeed, if you actually visit Seoul, you'll find this to be an accurate representation of the city. It's easy to adjust to the surroundings of Seoul. It's safe, brimming with merriment, and really clean, by the way. Damn. And when the sun sets on the city, night markets spring forth o'er the festive streets, boasting edible wares to the tune of scrumptious fried wonderment. There's a lot of food. And this is how Extracurricular shocks us. It says, beneath the surface of this city come to fruition is ubiquitous struggle, faced largely by youth who are dared to match their wits against the pressures of frenetic, highly competitive society. Extracurricular, in the broadest sense, is about how society forces the peoples contained within it to conform to its norms, even if the rules and regulations composing such norms are set against one's nature, nurture, or general predilections. And thus, such people cast against the prevailing normativity are advanced upon their dooms rather swiftly. The characters in the show are young and unwise, and don't have anyone to guide them. I mean, it's hard as a young person to come to terms with the brutality of the world around you. It's hard to figure out how to deal with anxiety, stress, and depression. And someone in high school or just out of it, even someone who is relatively good-natured is liable amid struggle to make poor decisions. And thus, the beasts set against better nature break forth from within and lead the show's characters to do monstrous things in order to cope with reality and survive. I mean, Jisoo does dishonest and selfish things that hurt the sex workers in his employ.
너가 경찰한테 거짓말 안 하면 그 사람이 막 너 어떻게 할 수도 있잖아.
And he doesn't seem like the type of person who would do such things. I mean, he doesn't even seem like the type of person who would run a sex work ring. But that's part of why the show is so effective. It's shocking to see this quiet, nerdy kid masterminding such a scheme, and we are thus forced to grapple with his moral standing. When pitted against brutality, tender-hearted people are liable to give life to the demons in their minds, and thereby lose themselves to the darker sides of cities. How does one keep it all together amongst the madness of modern urban centers within which the downtrodden are oft overlooked and thrown to desperation, sometimes go adrift? Extracurricular is a really deep exploration of despair, and it's rather inspiring that the creators of this series were willing to confront such discomforting but wholly relevant questions for modern South Korean urbanites and really all humans. And this is true of so many South Korean films and shows. They explore the monsters inside and out in such a cutting, honest way. In all seriousness, if you're tired of the standard Hollywood fare, I highly suggest you give some South Korean content a try. If you do, I guarantee you'll leave feeling fulfilled and stirred to thought. South Korean art is of formidable sophistication. The work produced therein confronts themes of universal import to humanity. And what's more, K-dramas specifically are soulful, and even pure to an extent. And even when set in dark places and chock full of fiendish baddies of all sorts, I find myself feeling happy when I watch them. I also found myself feeling happy during the short time I was in South Korea. The people there were so sweet, helpful, honorable, and best of all, full of dynamic spirit. Their country is fun, beautiful, and easy to navigate. So perhaps after watching this video and after checking out a few more shows on this list, consider it for your next trip. Especially if you've never experienced zombies in person before. Just try to mind their tendency to bite.
Anyway, that's the video. Thank you for joining us here today. Check out Generation Films if you want to see more of me, and check out Generation Ochi if you want to see more of, well, this. And check the links down below for more information on Discover Korea Live. For now, my name is American Ben. This is... I'll catch you next time. Peace.